Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Emerald Planet. All the ecology news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's your host, Executive Director of the Emerald Planet, Dr. Sam Lee Hancock.
Hello and welcome to the Emerald Planet as we come to you on a week-to-week basis from Washington, D.C. and the United States, looking for those 1,000 best practices, the technologies, services, and products that are making a difference as we move through the 21st century. As we go to a planet with 9 billion people by 2050, how are we going to be able to take care of all these people as far as the basic infrastructure and the food, the fuel, the fiber, and all the other things they need to thrive in society and not just survive? And one of the things that we're looking at is the Arctic Circle, because there's great changes there because of climate change. All of a sudden, there's trade routes going through, expansion of business, tremendous amount of natural resources that are being explored and actually extracted at this time. So many people are looking at the Arctic zone as maybe the new Earth as far as the natural resources that we need, and also markets and trade routes. And I have a gentleman sitting right beside me who's doing a great deal in research on all this. This is Dr. Robert H. Rich. He's the Executive Director of what's called the Arctic Research Consortium of the United States, ARCUS. And Bob, welcome to the Emerald Planet.
Thank you so much, Sam. It's great to be here.
We're glad to have you. I tell you, it's really exciting, the work that you're doing, and the fact that you're looking at the Arctic zone that most Americans don't even know exist. And so you're doing something that's really beyond the horizon in many different ways, and quite literally. But tell us a little bit about the mission and the vision of your organization.
Sure. So ARCUS is dedicated to helping Arctic research to connect across boundaries. And we are interested in helping researchers to work better together with each other, to be able to communicate and coordinate, to share with each other and with the stakeholders to the research, the decision makers, looking at changes in the Arctic and what do they mean, and really helping people in the Arctic communities as well to be able to connect with the research.
Yeah, and looking at this, I mean, most people don't even know this all exists, and this is such a huge part of the globe that we're looking at there. And of course, the amount of riches, if we can use that term for natural resources, is just becoming apparent. But looking at this map, tell us a little bit about what we're looking at here as far as the United States, the Arctic zone, and of course the juxtaposition to Russia and other countries.
Yeah, so the United States is an Arctic nation by virtue of being the owners of the state of Alaska, and there are actually 8 Arctic nations in the world that go around the circumpolar Arctic. That include Russia and Norway and Sweden and Finland, Iceland, Canada, and Greenland, which is part of Denmark, and the United States, of course.
Yeah, and looking at this is a huge area. You have any idea what the actual distance is, and then the last landmass that we're actually looking at?
Oh gosh, the distances are vast. I want to say that the Arctic is something like 1/10 of the Earth's surface.
Oh, that's absolutely incredible. Now, looking at Alaska, what is actually the riches and the reach of that into the Arctic zone itself?
So Alaska has, depending on your definition of the Arctic, anything up to about 50% of the state is considered Arctic. In fact, some people in Alaska would consider the entire state Arctic. And Alaska has both the vast wilderness areas in northern Alaska, as well as also a lot of commercial activity as well. There's definitely mining, there's oil production, and then there's a lot of Arctic residents in Alaska too. People who've been living primarily by subsistence lifestyle for thousands of years.
Yeah, and it's just amazing. And then when you look at many of the tribal areas across these countries that we've just went through there, but go through that list of countries again so people can, now that we have a map, they can actually fix it in their mind.
Sure. So the biggest piece of the Arctic is in Russia. They're about half. And then there's Scandinavia, the Nordic countries, and that would include Sweden and Norway and Finland and Iceland, and then Greenland and Canada and the United States.
Yeah, and I tell you, it's such a huge area. And the amazing part about this, at one time, you know, this was all frozen, you know, 12 months of the year. Now all of a sudden there's actually trade routes going through that. What's the importance of that as we're looking at the Arctic zone right now?
Well, I think that, you know, there's an awful lot of change going on in the Arctic right now. We've been seeing for maybe the last 30 or 50 years that increasingly we're seeing where once the Arctic Ocean was completely covered by sea ice for much of the year, now there's much greater periods of time when different parts of the Arctic Ocean are not covered by sea ice. What does that mean? Well, some have said it's like a whole new ocean opening up, that we've never really had any commercial activity going on. And so now, all of a sudden, people are looking at this. Now, it's not to the point where there's an awful lot of commercial activity yet. That's probably going to take, you know, another 40, 50, 100 years for us to see a lot of that. But a lot of companies and a lot of investors are starting to see potential in that.
Yeah, and a number of countries are really juxtapositioning themselves to take advantage, you know, as a country like China, which has no access to the Arctic, but yet wants to be considered as an Arctic nation. Are there other countries doing a similar kind of thing?
Sure, yeah. So there's actually a lot of interest in the Arctic. The primary governance body of the Arctic, it's a consultative body called the Arctic Council, which is composed of the 8 Arctic nations and representatives of all the indigenous peoples of the Arctic. And that organization has what they call observers. And so China has been an observer now for a number of years, and also nations like Korea, and South Korea and Singapore, as well as many European nations, are observers to the Arctic Council as well. So there's a lot of interest in engaging with the Arctic well beyond the Arctic region.
And the whole thing about it, having the European nations and Korea and others, is really you're getting new ideas, you're getting new energy, and also ideas about development, which some people are saying we don't want to develop that whatsoever, and others are saying the riches there are just too vast. And as we go to a planet of 9 billion people and then maybe 12 to 13 billion by the end of the century, they're saying we're going to need those resources. And looking at what you're doing, what are the challenges as far as the research that's going on, you know, for your organization and many others dealing with the Arctic?
So in order to do research in the Arctic, you need to contend with certain things which are relatively unique. The one that most people think about immediately is it's cold, right? So during certain times of the year, it gets very cold. Routinely in a town like Utqiagvik, you might have temperatures of 40 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit or colder during the winter time. So that's a real issue. Even during the summertime, it can get cold very quickly. In fact, they say that in most places in the Arctic, it could snow any day of the year. Beyond that, there's the vast distances involved that really require you to think about how are you going to get to a research site in a remote location, which is coupled with a lack of infrastructure. The Arctic, by and large, doesn't have a lot of communities. It doesn't have a lot of research stations. It doesn't have a lot of roads. And as we were talking about, mobility is often an issue. So all of these things, I think, conspire to make it difficult to extract knowledge out of the region and to be able to learn what's going on. At the same time, the indigenous peoples have a vast store of knowledge that they've accumulated over thousands of years that they've been able to bring to the questions. So perhaps more than anywhere else on Earth, we really tie in deeply the research community with the indigenous community.
Yeah, and we're just looking at these photographs here, but this just gives you an idea of some of the equipment that you need up there, and it's all, and when you look at the outfits that these people are wearing, I mean, it's just incredible how you can actually survive. And you know, there's been explorers there for hundreds of years, and to think we have all this modern technology and it's still a really tough place to get there. But looking at the why and how as far as the Arctic research, what are you trying to extract out of all this vast amount of data that now is being collected, not only as we're seeing here from the ships and these submarines and all that, but actually, 60,000 feet or 6 miles into the air, looking at all this through satellites, and also there's a lot of drone activity that's going on in this area as well.
So what we're trying to do within ARCUS is really to tap into a wide range of scientific disciplines, researchers all over the world at different organizations, academic, industrial researchers, government agencies, nonprofits, and help people to work together more effectively. Mm-hmm. And so what we're really about is to get all the knowledge together and try to make it so that we can all work together, and so that we can learn valuable pieces of information which can then be used for decision making at the local level, at the regional level, and even on the global scale, because changes in the Arctic are affecting people all over the world.
Yeah, and the whole thing about this, we're understanding that the change really is almost on a day-to-day basis. It's just really, and it's almost like it's galloping through. But why is this the fastest warming place on the planet? I mean, that's what you hear, and it's hard to believe when you see these scenes with all the ice and all the snow, and yet it's warming, what, twice the rate that they expected or was projected to warm?
Yeah, so what we're seeing is we're actually seeing the warming of the Arctic is accelerated because of the fact that it is so frozen. See, what's going on is what we call Arctic amplification. Mm-hmm. This idea that when you have a lot of snow and ice on the ground, it reflects a lot of the heat that's coming in from the sun back up into space. Mm-hmm. But as that ice melts, you're replacing a fairly reflective white snow and ice layer with ocean or land, which is not as reflective. And so that absorbs more heat, causing a lot more heat to stay in the Arctic. And so what we see is that the Arctic continues to warm much faster than the rest of the world.
And that's why I left this photograph up here, because we're seeing this very thing happen right here. You see, the bits of ice that are breaking off, but you see the reflective nature of the ice pack itself, and then you see this dark blue of the water, and people don't realize that that's actually absorbing whatever sun and the heat and the energy that's coming in, and it's causing, more of this to break up. Is that correct?
That's right. That's exactly right. And we're seeing that in the ocean, and we're also seeing that on land as, the white and of the ice and snow is replaced with the green and the brown of the landscape.
Yeah, and we see this right here, and it's just vast green, which is not something that you really expect. Looking at this photograph here, you can also see the danger that you have in that whole area. But what do you see for the expansion and further broadening of the research work you're doing over the next 5, 10, 15 years for ARCUS?
Well, I think it's really important to understand the details of how these changes are taking place, and to think about how can we react to these changes and to do something that will help people to be resilient, to help communities to be resilient, to help Arctic communities to continue to thrive even as the environment is changing.
That's fantastic. This is Dr. Robert H. Rich, Executive Director of ARCUS. Thank you for being with us as we look at the Arctic zone, the changes that are going on, and how it impacts the world as we create the Emerald Planet.
So, same time next week?
Well, of course. Put away a few bucks, feel like $1 million. For free tips to help you save, go to Feed the Pig.
I dare you. I dare you to change the world. Yeah, you. Getting that college education.
I dare you to be somebody important.
Like be a teacher or a reality TV star.
I dare you to stand up here.
To call the shots.
To be a role model.
An inspiration.
An innovator.
To be a teacher.
Think you can change my life?
Make me excited about science like you.
Have a career that really means something?
Then do it.
I dare you.
Well, if we do it, you just...
They say you don't have to be so strong, but this is my mother, my purpose. Strength is not optional. See, I lift her now like she raised me then, so I know my strength is super, but I'm still human.
Oh, look who's here.
We're back to the Emerald Planet. Here again, your host, Dr. Sam.
Hello and welcome to the Emerald Planet as we're looking around the globe for those 1,000 best practices, what we call the best of the best, or the solutions that are making a difference as we move through the 21st century. And as we go towards 2050 and we add 2 billion new people to the planet, how are we going to be able to identify and actually make available all the resources that are going to be needed so that these people are actually thriving on Earth and not just surviving? And many people say we just can't do that. But at the same time, these 2 billion people are going to come along anyway, it seems like, and so we have to take care of them. And someone sitting right beside me is actually doing a lot of research in that and trying to make sure that we're ready for these new people. This is Brenda Ekwurzel. She is a senior climate scientist and director of climate science. This is a long title you have there. For Climate and Energy Program at the Union of Concerned Scientists, the UCS. And Brenda, welcome to Emerald Planet TV.
Thank you so much.
We're glad to have you here. And this is a very famous organization, Union of Concerned Scientists. So tell us a little bit about what it means and what it does and some of the vision and the mission it has, and then let's get into the Arctic and some of the work that you're doing there.
Sure. So UCS has coming up on its 50th anniversary. It was founded by nuclear physicists back in 1969.
That's a long time now.
Yes. And essentially, the basic idea is that science should be at the table and people should have that information and not so that we don't get eaten for lunch, basically.
Yeah, and the whole thing about it too is that you really want to be there because one is that you're really looking at science. You know, the numbers really do tell stories. Even though, you know, people try to make them say other things. But it can't be just the political narrative or the business narrative. It must be the scientific narrative. So looking at the Union of Concerned Scientists, how do you make sure that you are at the table and that people are truly listening to you?
Sure. I'm a scientist, and I really benefit at UCS from having colleagues who really understand the nuts and bolts of how do you better communicate the science, how do you get a meeting with someone who is making decisions at a key point in time and things like that. And so we bring a lot of scientists from district members of policymakers and have them tell their stories, and so that's really very important to us.
And then bringing in research institutes, the business concerns, higher education, the citizens, how do you get all of those different groups involved? Or are you actually going to meet them, or do you actually try to bring them all together to have a narrative?
We do both. We meet people where they are and where they're doing really great, like you mentioned, innovations for solutions. We're most interested in solving some of the big problems that we focus on, and that's where we love doing a lot of work. At the same time, we also keep track and monitor some of the data telling us how we're doing in solving that problem or not succeeding in solving a particular problem.
Now, where is this photograph taken here? You're standing here with the American flag. Does this so happen to be the North Pole? Or?
It is the North Pole. I was very lucky. This is 1991.
And, that was just a few years ago.
Just a few years ago, yes. And that's a picture with me and my advisor. He was on the German ship, the Polarstern, and I was on a Swedish icebreaker, the Odin, and we met at the North Pole. So we'd been up there for a couple months crunching through thick ice. And so it was a really fun moment.
I tell you, this is absolutely a fantastic photograph, and not many people have that the photograph going on. But getting into the real impact as far as climate change is concerned and what's happening at the Arctic, because we understand it's the fastest warming place on the planet. And how is it bringing about what we're seeing right here? What's really going on with the climate? And some people say Mother Nature is not only upset, but very upset.
Yeah.
So, is she very upset?
I would say that it is exceeding scientists' expectations for how fast the pace of change is happening. As was mentioned earlier in the show, it's called Arctic amplification. It's really ramped up. It's amping up the warming and the consequences for everyone around the world, because land ice, a lot of it is in the polar regions, and the Arctic is among the fastest in the world that is delivering fresh water to our oceans, and that's raising sea level.
Yeah, and the whole thing about this, and sea level rise, this is something that, you know, a few people say that there's a debate about where all this is coming from. But it seems like sea level rise is alive and well and spreading across the earth. You just ask people in Bangladesh, you ask people in the South Pacific Islands. So what are we seeing in countries like the United States that are very stable, but yet we have huge coastlines? Are we seeing this happening right now as far as the United States and other major ocean-facing countries?
One of my colleagues likes to say the fate of Miami is really due to the fate of the Arctic. And so we don't escape in the United States. And some of my colleagues have really looked at the tidal flooding, the nuisance flooding, and we see that it's not just Miami, it's all around the eastern seaboard, the Gulf of Mexico, and places like San Francisco, the Bay Area, Southern California. You're seeing that high tides are much higher than before. They may be flooding church parking lots, and so
like
you can't
Norfolk.
get there. Yeah,
like in
exactly.
Norfolk. Yeah. It's going on on a consistent basis, so it's very real. And supposedly they're raising all the locks, you know, at the largest naval base, Navy base in the world, which is in Norfolk in the Tidewater area. And if the military is spending that kind of money to do that now, it's got to be real.
Absolutely, and we've had the privilege of working with military leaders who are on the front lines, and we have a report, Military Sites at Risk from Climate Change. And most of these air bases, the Navy, as the naval commanders, they say, and admirals, they say, we operate at sea level, and so we are very concerned about sea level rise.
Looking at what's going on here as far as Greenland is concerned, what is really happening? Greenland, Iceland, you know, all these areas are within the Arctic zone. What's happening to their landmass?
What is amazing is that there are several factors. We have the global average temperatures warming, but in the zonal average of the Arctic region, it's more than twice the globe, that temperature rise in that region.
That's this amplification that you're talking about.
And so, but when you melt sea ice or you melt Arctic land ice and the Greenland ice, if you uncover darker ground, then you're going to have a feedback where you can melt more and more and more. And so when the sun's above the horizon,
so it's almost like it's lubricating whatever ice is left.
Whatever meltwater is getting underneath these ice sheets, we're seeing that it can cause more rapid flow.
Now, looking at this, looking at 1991, 2017, what is the difference that we're looking at here? To, you know, the untrained eye, we can see it's a little different. But I think to your eye, you're seeing something very different.
Yeah, these are images of the minimum time of the year, which happens each year in the Arctic, where you have the minimum sea ice area. Back in 1991, it was what you see in that figure. But in the last 3 years leading up to 2017, what we see is that it's around 62 to 75% of the area of back in 1991.
So
that's dramatic.
So in other words, we've lost anywhere from a quarter to 2/3 as far as the ice in this minimum time of the year, where it's the warmest and you have the minimum
late summer,
freezing.
usually September.
That's an incredible, when you look at this, I mean, it's an incredible change. How are we seeing this in suburbia Washington, D.C.? This may be a photograph, we're looking at it right now, because...
Exactly. I took this photo after a nor'easter in March. We had a whole bunch of nor'easters in the eastern U.S., and the Mid-Atlantic region was no exception.
And they just kept coming one right on top of the other.
And what was happening is a lot of scientists were looking at this wavier jet stream and very intense weather that was happening with the nor'easters. So there's some evidence, it's not locked down and solid yet, but that it's growing, that the Arctic wavier jet stream is playing a bigger role in sort of delivering more extreme weather. What we're seeing is it's less snow in the western half of the US and more snow in the eastern part of the US. And so that's very bad for water resources in some of the arid western states.
Yeah, and people, you know, a few claim that we're not really suffering from climate change, but really climate change is everywhere around us. And when you talk to people on the street, as I go through the neighborhoods, you know, with the dogs and, you know, just talk to people, I mean, it just comes up. And it's something I don't ask about, it just comes up as far as that. And then we have what they call these rain bombs. What's a rain bomb? And I think that goes to the heart of what we're looking at here.
Yeah, sometimes you can have an incredible storm coming in, and some of these, sometimes we call it bombogenesis, where you have a sudden drop in atmospheric pressure over 24 hours that is so dramatic. You can have very strong winds, toppling trees, toppling power lines. It's a very dangerous situation, and really pay attention to the local weatherman when you hear that bomb word.
Now, we borrowed some photographs here. These are students. These are the future generations we're going to be looking at that are actually going to have to solve this issue, because we've created this and we're leaving it for these next generations to solve and take care of, and hopefully we're contributing to that. But looking at what is the 3 key things that these young eyes and these young brains need to know as we move forward, and how to address climate change and to look at the Arctic in a totally different way than we've ever looked at it before.
Right. Well, the age of these folks that we see, these young minds, we are investing in their education, which is wonderful. And they will likely be bringing some innovative solutions into the mix. Because really, to the small island nations you were saying and the Arctic region, to really slow the pace of change, probably in the next 15 years, we have to start rolling out some really innovative solutions. So I am so excited that they're excited about the future and being part of the solution.
Yeah, when you see this apparatus and the clothing and the big smile on his face, you know that they're getting ready for all this. But I'm going to leave this at, what are we seeing here, and how these photographs juxtaposition, what story are they telling?
What I see is that a lot of us who have been studying this for a long time have been sounding the warning bells. I think because of the extreme weather, I think because of sea level rise, coastal communities, Bangladesh, Miami, Norfolk, San Francisco, we are seeing that people are realizing the extent of this. And so I think the old and the young are all joining forces to solve this, which I'm very encouraged about.
Yeah, and I'm going to leave up, because this is the future generation, and the whole thing about it is we have to get busy about this. What do you see for the Union Concerned Scientists over the next 5, 10, to 15 years? What do you see happening? And we have to be quick.
Sure. Looking for solutions that are locally relevant, and raising voices that don't always get heard.
And having the teachers and the scientists interacting with the young, as we're seeing right here, and making sure that we're moving forward in a very much more positive way. This is Brenda Ekwurzel. She is the Senior Climate Scientist and Director of Climate Science at the Climate and Energy Program, the Union of Concerned Scientists, USC. And this is something that's really important, the research that you're doing, Brenda. Thank you for being here, and thank you, dear viewers, for looking and listening to this as we're bringing change to you as we create the Emerald Planet.
Take a look under your bed.
Nicely.
Stuff under there? What about jobs? No? Now try your closet. Still no jobs? Just more stuff? Well, you really have both. See, stuff is defined as household articles considered as a group. Sometimes this stuff is no longer needed. Wait, no longer needed? That can't be right. Because remember those jobs you were looking for? Those are really needed. And they're the stuff inside your stuff. Our job is to unlock those jobs. And it starts when you donate your stuff to your local Goodwill. Here's how we do it. When you donate to Goodwill, we sell your stuff to provide job training for people right here in your community. So just by teaming up with Goodwill, you help create jobs. And isn't that worth parting with the leftover keytar from your 80s cover band? Goodwill. Donate stuff, create jobs.
We just finished dinner and it was time for homework. He hates homework. I know he's bright.
Why is it so hard for me?
He's
I'm
just
trying
gotta
as
try a
hard
little
as
harder.
I can.
1 in 5 children struggle with learning and attention issues. Go from misunderstanding to understood.org.
It's me, Artie. Come see what I collected from the Creative Galaxy in my idea box.
Transform your world.
Will you help me make art?
Before you throw it away,
Hey, I have an idea.
think outside the box.
Go be amazing!
Give your cardboard box another life. Recycle.
Most party fouls? Not a big deal. But if you decide to drink and drive underage, you could lose your license and your freedom. Underage drinking and driving. The ultimate party foul.
We're back to the Emerald Planet. Here again, your host, Dr. Sam.
Hello and welcome to the Emerald Planet as we come to you from Washington, D.C. And what we're doing is we're trying to glean out the new information, the new dynamic that's going on around the globe with climate change, and at the same time, what is happening at the Arctic Circle. Many people in the United States don't even realize that the United States is part owner of the Arctic Circle, if we can use that term. I mean, it really is a international treasure for all citizens that exist on planet Earth. But at the same time, the United States is one of the major countries that really does have position there, and at the same time, it has great responsibility. And sitting right beside me is Deanna Willer. She is a science teacher and Arctic Circle explorer at J.C. Parks Elementary School in Head, Maryland. And you are really one of the leaders as far as education that's looking at the Arctic and then what that really means for the Earth. How does an elementary school teacher reach out and do this and engage just hundreds and now thousands of children over the years to make them aware of what's going on in the Arctic that most people don't even know it's part of the United States?
Well, I had the rare opportunity to be part of the Polar Trek initiative, and Polar Trek is a program for teachers and researchers. They both have to apply, and then they pair up teachers with researchers, and you get to go out on expeditions in the Arctic and the polar regions.
Yeah. Now, looking at this is at the school, and so we're going this global thing of looking at the Arctic zone and studying everything that's happening there, and then how we bring this back to our local communities. But what you've been able to do is build this bridge through the educational program is that, yeah, this is something it's unique, it's novel, in some ways it's almost exotic, you know, to go to the Arctic range, the Arctic zone, and yet we're bringing it right into a local school in Indian Head, Maryland. So how do the kids identify with this, and they're out there planting their gardens and digging in the dirt, looking for earthworms? How do you bring all that together?
Well, it's interesting because everything we do affects the Arctic. And so if I can get students to do things locally outside, then we can teach them about how their actions actually impact broader places. And so just like the garden picture, right? This just was taken a couple weeks ago. The students built the raised gardens, they filled them, they're planting them, but then they realize, hey, they're using less fossil fuels because we're growing them locally. There's less fossil fuels, there's less pollution in the air, and there's less, so that will affect climate change.
Yeah, and I like the way you said it, is that what we're doing here really impacts the Arctic. Most people don't realize is how the Arctic is impacting our day-to-day lives. We're just existing and going through our day-to-day routine, but what's going on there really does have a boomerang effect and a ripple effect both across the whole planet. So how is what's happening in the Arctic affecting these 3 children that are actually studying about gardens and water and better soil at your school?
How does it affect them? Well, the students begin to realize that their actions have greater impact. And so, you know, if I can get that across to students, then I feel like I've really accomplished making the connections. It's all about connections, connecting what we do to what's happening in the Arctic. So just like plastics, we have a big initiative to reduce the amount of plastics. And so my green team has been very strong about skipping the straw or going reusable. And so they realize, and now with the current research, they're finding plastics in the ice up in the Arctic. They're finding plastics in the deepest trenches in the ocean. So they realize that our accidental trash or our use of straws then have greater impacts beyond them. And so what they've decided is that if they can focus just on one small thing like straws, then perhaps they can get people to think thoughtfully about their choices, and if they can make different choices, then we have a much broader reach. So our goal right now is to skip the straw, and we've been actually, the county commissioners have recognized it. We did a program with 30 nonprofits and elected officials that came along with parents and 200 students, where the students taught everybody about the watershed and the impacts of plastic.
Yeah, and looking at this photograph here, I mean, this is something that's very practical, it's very real. You have, you know, the adult and the children all working together, and really it's almost, they're nurturing the plants, but it's about water harvesting at the same time. Why is water harvesting so important in all the things that you're doing with the gardens and the outreach as far as the science is concerned?
Watershed is prime in our area because we're so connected to the creek that's next door, our wetland. We actually built a wetland to stop the erosion.
This is at the school?
Yes. After I came back from the Arctic, I thought, we got to make science real. So how can we make it real? We went out in the playground, we went out, we saw a little bit of erosion. Well, 2 years later, and $137,000 worth of grants, we had the whole school plant 4,000 plants, and we built our own wetland, 2 rain gardens, several upland forests, because they know if we can slow the water, we can clean the water, then we're going to make better impact on all our streams, Chesapeake Bay, oceans, and Arctic.
Yeah, the theme that we have here, I'm going to read this to you. You already know because we discussed this, but meshing the love of learning and the out of doors so that no child is left indoors. You know, it's normally no child is left behind.
Right.
Now you're saying no child is left indoors. What does that really mean, and how is this being amplified right here with these children?
Well, I believe science has to be hands-on. So if it's hands-on, it's meaningful for the students. So the way to make it meaningful is to get students outside. I took a poll one time in my 3rd grade class, asked how many students had walked in the woods, and I was amazed. Only 3 out of 1 class did. So that's what we do. We get the students out there.
So in essence, about 3 out of 30 roughly. That's amazing.
It was. And so with the advent of, you know, videos and video games, and also just people are less apt to go outside because of safety issues and everything, we started saying, no, we need to do something different. So we get them outside, we get them working in the wetland, we get them across the street to the stream. Every 3rd grader then goes down a little bit further to the Potomac River, to Chapman State Park. The 4th graders go a little bit further down our watershed, down to Mallows Bay. And last week, this all happened the last 2 weeks, and last week I was able to make the final connection. We went to Delaware shores, and our students got to see the Arctic bird, the red knot, as they come on their 2,000 or 20,000 mile migration, and they stop in the Delaware shores to eat the horseshoe crabs. And it's such an incredible, marvelous interdependence of the species that it happens, and it's just very you know, so the students got to see this endangered bird that actually nests up in the Arctic.
Yeah, it's fantastic. But looking at the schools, it sounds like that Maryland's very progressive. It wants the children to be connected to the environment as well as really delve into their education. What makes Maryland itself unique? Because we keep talking on EmeraldPlanet about best practices.
Right.
And we have thousands of best practices, but it sounds like the state of Maryland, with a teacher like you, with the principals and the other teachers willing to go, you know, with all this program, is that the state is a best practice in itself.
Right. We actually have environmental standards that we have to meet, and they call them MWEs, Meaningful Watershed Experiences for Students. So students, by the time they graduate, have to have a meaningful watershed experience. We try to get that into the elementary so they don't have to wait till the high school, and by the time they're in the high school, they understand and have a depth of what they do impacts the watershed.
And the whole thing about it, and looking at this, I mean, this is something that's really cute as far as this little fountain there, and you've got this big tire around it. But how does this, something like this that's so cute, directly relate to the students, and they see this is something that's very serious, and that's not something just light and airy, but we really have to do this.
It was a fun project, but it had so much meaning in it, because first they were recycling and repurposing a truck tire. Secondly, they connected the use of the solar power, because they decreased the amount of fossil fuel use by using solar energy. Then they realized, hey, they are actually making a positive impact on the environment by reusing and using alternative energies, and that had an effect on climate change and the Arctic.
Now, looking at the water, what the water fountain, if you will, that we have here, how has that connected them back to the environment? We've seen them, you know, at the bay. We've seen them on the river and all that. And how does this fountain itself help to expand, yet at the same time complete the cycle of this water?
Well, I think it in several different ways. One is they realize that they are repurposing, reusing, recycling, using less consumer products. And secondly, I think they understand that the energy, you know, the alternative energy. And third, I think they actually see how water is used, you know, and it evaporates because we have to refill it a lot, and so they get the science about water, the water cycle. Yes, the whole water cycle.
Now, looking at this, skip the straw. Okay, we were talking about this earlier, and I wanted to get to this photograph. And you're doing this across all grades?
We are yes. The whole initiative started with the Green Team, which is a group of 35 students that meet every week in the morning. But it's the whole school has been adopted that initiative. So we do skip the straw months. We do PSAs, we do announcements. We have gone to the commissioners. So the commissioners actually declared Earth Day as Skip the Straw Day. And one of my students actually spoke before the commissioners, and they recognized our group. And we have actually reduced our straw use to by 5,000 straws in 1 month.
Oh, that's incredible. Yeah, that's incredible. And people say, well, that's such a small thing. It's in the small things that we address the big things. And just like what we have here as far as this water, what are we seeing here with this?
Oh, okay. So there's two things going on in this water. We're an ocean guardian school too, a no ocean guardian school, and so we were able to get a grant to get a hydration station, which we have now decreased by 35,000 one-time use plastic bottles, because we see bottles a lot.
Can we say that again? That's significant.
35,000 one-time use plastic bottles.
We've reduced that, removed that from the waste stream. That's incredible. Congratulations.
Yes. Thank you. And above it is a mural that we made out of, other than the canvas and the paint itself, everything else is recycled items. And what you don't see, it says Marine Mustangs to the Rescue, and it's about our sea life and protecting it from plastic.
Yeah, and this is making it right there. What do you see for the expansion of this across J.C. Sparks Elementary School and even the state?
Well, we would...
Got to be quick.
Okay, we would further like to expand our Skip the Straw. We want to see Charles County ban straws entirely.
Oh, that's absolutely fantastic. And this is really some beautiful artwork you have going. Deanna Wheeler, she's a science teacher, Arctic Circle Explorer, J.C. Parks Elementary School, Indian Head, Maryland. Thank you for being with us. And thank you, dear viewer, for being with us as we look how youth really are the leaders of tomorrow as we create the
Guess what? I have some news for you. There's free food right there, junk food. You see that truck? Oh, jeez. It's a 2 Michelin star chef. All for free, ladies and gentlemen. All for free.
Here we have a panzanella with summer vegetables and pesto. Enjoy. How we doing?
Fantastic. So what do you got going on underneath that plate there?
This food is really about to be thrown away.
Yeah.
Is there something wrong with this food? Where did you get it from?
From farmers markets. They put aside the ugly vegetables and the ugly fruits.
Carrot top, soft avocados. It was all food that was going to be discarded.
Even the drink you had is made from like a little bruised peach. Did it taste a little bruised?
Great. It's good.
The average person throws away 24 pounds of food a month. That's a lot. Isn't that a lot? Go visit SaveTheFood.com for more information. Thank you. Junk food time!
We're back to the Emerald Planet. Here again, your host, Dr. Sam.
Hello and welcome to the Emerald Planet as we come to you on a week-to-week basis from Washington, D.C. in the United States as we're looking around the globe for those 1,000 best practices, technologies, services, products, and the processes, of course, as we move through the 21st century. And we're looking for those leaders, regardless of where they are on the planet, that are making a difference as we move towards 2050. We have a planet of about 9 billion people, and at the same time increased demands on natural resources and all the basic infrastructure, the food, the fuel, the fiber that we need to take care of these new people. And I have a gentleman who's really on the leading edge, almost beyond the horizon, if we can think about it that way, way up in Alaska. This is Corey Ray Shakawalk Erickson. He's in the North Slope Science Liaison and UIC Science, which is a corporation there, and I'm going to let him talk about that in a few minutes. He's coming in by Skype. And we have our special guest sitting right beside me. This is Dr. Robert H. Rich. He's the Executive Director of the Arctic Research Consortium for the United States. And Bob, welcome to the Emerald Planet TV.
Thank you, Sam.
Corey, are you with us?
Yes, sir.
We're glad to have you, and we've really built you up. You're beyond the horizon up there in Alaska, and thank you for joining us by Skype, and it's exciting the work that you're doing up there. But tell us a little bit about being, born, raised in the Arctic zone. What does that really mean to you when many people in the lower 48 don't even realize we have an Arctic, and they don't feel connected to it, but yet you're living it on a day-to-day basis. Tell us about how that special relationship that you have there.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And we are literally past the horizon for several months of the year, so literally and figuratively, I think I should say. I'd like to first point out that people might not realize how diverse and how wide Alaska is as far as geographically and the populations that are spread out, and the part of Alaska that's considered Arctic has just this wide variety of different cultures. We have the Inupiaq Eskimos, Yupik Eskimos, Siberian Yupik, the Athabascans. We have this huge, wide variety of Alaska Native peoples, and they live in different areas on the coast and the interior. We all live off of different resources, so as far as how climate change affects us, the narratives that we have can be very different than outside narratives, and I guess just directly differences growing up in rural Alaska. I mean, it's hard to recognize what some people outside of rural Alaska take for granted, but just try to imagine not having, say, running water, having to hand carry every last drop of water that you use, having no shower, no sink, running water sink, no toilet. Imagine having no restaurants available to eat at, a grocery store that's very limited. Heating could be a problem in some villages where people don't have the heating resources, so they spend a lot of time really just trying to stay warm. So all these different things that people have to deal with in rural Alaska and Alaska Native villagers have to deal with for the most part is something that we have to battle on a daily basis. So it feels like we live more in the now kind of. No one's really worried about their own personal agendas, and they're more worried about the wellness of their family and their community and working together to make sure that it's working.
Now, looking at this map, and this is really part of the Arctic zone with Alaska, Russia, Canada, others across there. How does this impact your day-to-day life? Or again, you're living in the now, you're living to exist in these small rural communities and in many cases as part of the traditional peoples of Alaska. Or do you really feel the fact that you are now becoming more and more really the center of the focus of the world and center of the universe as far as what's happening in the Arctic zone?
I think, well, one of the questions that I was prepared to answer was the top 3 impacts of climate change on us. And I think as far as coastal communities, the communities that focus on the marine mammals as our primary resource, sea ice is by far number 1, having a huge impact on our access to resources and the protection of our villages that are living right on the coast, as far as not having that skirt of ice to protect from storms. The lack of ice is, in our science, a lot of our science groups have seen that the average wave height in the Arctic Ocean is getting bigger and bigger every year with the less ice to kind of break up that energy, which is a big thing. Animal movements are changing, and we're adjusting with those changes. Bird migrations, sea mammal migrations, it's in our nature as rural Alaskans and Inupiaq Eskimos to be very flexible and to be able to adjust with these changes. So if you could imagine having a reporter come into a village and asking all these questions that are based on narratives of climate change from, say, East Coast or Facebook or something, it's hard for us to visualize how people see these changes because we're living in the now, in the day, and we're not worried about a lot of these narratives. So it's really hard to bridge that gap. The conceptual gap is very huge, but then the geographic problem. I mean, Washington and the East Coast, the distance from Arctic is just really hard to explain to people.
Yeah, and I think also too is, and we have this map here as far as the native languages and the different types of traditional peoples that you have there. And I think most people in the lower 48 have no concept of really the diversity and the difference among traditional peoples as far as the food, the lifestyle, the religion, language, and all these other kinds of things. How does that diversity really impact on the day-to-day life? Or everybody just pitches in, you work together regardless of background, and try to move forward as best possible?
I think it really is in our nature to be, the communal, everybody helps out each other. It's just part of us, so that's not something new, and that's kind of how we're dealing with these new problems. We have such a drastic seasons, even without climate change, our seasons are so drastic and changing. We have to pay attention to so many variables that we're used to that kind of thing. Just an example, on the North Slope, the people, they need the shorefast ice as a platform to hunt the bowhead whales. So if you ask someone who's a bowhead whaler from Barrow, from Utqiagvik, how is climate change impacting you? If that year we happened to have nice ice and then the bowhead whales are very healthy that year, and we caught whales like this year, you're probably going to hear some positive things about climate change. But you go right down to the Nana region or the Bering Straits region, and you ask how has climate change impacted you, to say the village of Shishmaref, and they focus their hunts on the ugruk and the walrus, which follow the ice and live with the ice, and that could be a totally different story. If they didn't have access to ugruks one year, people will literally live hungry throughout that whole year. So you could have a drastically different story about how climate change is changing one village to the next village. You could have a village right on the interior that's not on the coast, and they could maybe not have any problems, or it's very, very variable.
I see. And looking at as far as what is UIC science and why does it matter to all Alaskans and actually everyone in the United States that UIC science exists?
So UIC is our village corporation, and that was created in the 1970s through an agreement and settlement with the federal government. We created 220 village corporations, so we're one out of 220, and that's the corporation for Barrow. So UIC has 50 companies in which we own, and UIC Science is one of them. And we specialize in providing logistics to scientists in the Arctic using Barrow as a hub. So I like to tell people that my job as liaison is to represent 200 scientists, Arctic researchers, scientists from across the board to our 10,000 in Inupiaq, and then turn around and represent our 10,000 in Inupiaq to 200 scientists. So every day is a different story. We work with literally all the funding agencies from NSF to NOAA to Department of Energy to Department of Defense through the Navy. Internationally, this picture you see right here is the NASA team that was out last month testing their drones for the Europa mission. We work with just hundreds of scientists, millions of dollars in contracts from across the board. Everybody wants to see the Arctic and be a part of the Arctic. Example here you see on your screen now is, we hire Inupiaq whalers and people who are professional in subsistence resources and who have that traditional knowledge, and we put them in charge of a lot of these research groups as far as being going out on the ice and setting up camps. The guy in the background, Michael Thomas, he has a gun there. He's the bear guard, and he's watching the conditions and he's making sure that the scientists are okay. Their lives are in his hands, and he's utilizing that knowledge that he experienced throughout his life from his elders and everybody. So that's kind of how we utilize the traditional knowledge, and that's really gives us a hand up as far as helping researchers, because they need that logistical help.
And I've got Bob sitting right beside me, and he knows very well how we really depend on the wisdom, the knowledge, and the sensitivity to the surroundings in order to really live in this kind of harsh environment. But Bob, you have the next question.
Yeah, so Corey, can you tell us a little bit about how UIC Science effectively provides support and logistics to the Arctic researchers?
Yeah, and just to go through a quick timeline, just in a nutshell, the federal government early on, they had a huge interest in the oil and gas in the North Slope, obviously. In 1921, they locked up most of the North Slope as a reserve for their new Navy gas and oil-powered fleet. So that's why they created this base camp. It's kind of a base operations camp outside of Barrow for that oil and gas exploration. In the 1940s, after the World War II, the oil and gas interest pulled out. Scientists came in and took over that campus. So for 30 or 40 years, it was the main Arctic research campus in the whole world, pretty much. The Navy lost interest, pulled out around the 80s, and they handed it over to our native corporation. So that's how we fell into this niche of owning this entire research campus, these laboratories. We have new state-of-the-art facilities. This image you see here is kind of jumbled, but that's just one example of one of our garages. We have snow machines, four-wheelers, off-road vehicles, boats, anything you could think of, garage space. There's some of our new facilities, but that's how we fell into that niche.
Corey, we're going to lose you just in a few seconds. What do you see for the growth and expansion of your organization over the next 5 or 10 years? You've got to be quick.
Have to keep representing our native people on the North Slope and try to respectfully listen to other people's narratives of climate change and share ours so that we're all on the same page.
That's fantastic. It's shorten his name, Corey Erickson. Right beside me is Dr. Bob Rich, as we're looking around the globe to create the Emerald Planet. That's it.
Thank you. Excellent.
It goes quick.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you for assembling this really good group of people. I tell you, this was great diversity and.
Sam, talk to your guest.
Yes, Corey. Corey, are you still with me?
Thank you.